18 million hair dryers sold in the late 1970s contained asbestos around the heating element, and every time you switched one on, it blew invisible fibers into your face. Here are 30 discontinued home items from the 80s that need to come back until you remember why they left. Waterbeds were the ultimate bedroom upgrade of the 1980s. A massive vinyl bladder filled with hundreds of gallons of water, mounted inside a heavy wooden frame with a built-in heater underneath. At the peak of the craze in 1987, nearly 1 in 5 mattresses sold in America was a waterbed, turning it into a $2 billion industry. A full unit weighed roughly 1,600 pounds when filled, and apartment floors were never built for that kind of concentrated load. Reports of second-story collapses made local news more than once. The vinyl bladder bred mold and bacteria in the warm, dark gap between mattress and frame. The built-in heater ran constantly, and a faulty thermostat could turn the surface scalding or ice-cold overnight. Punctures sent water across the floor and into the subfloor, warping hardwood and soaking insulation. Insurance companies quietly stopped covering water damage from beds, and landlords banned them outright. By the mid-90s, the industry had collapsed to less than 5% of mattress sales. Before the Consumer Product Safety Commission stepped in, 90% of hair dryer manufacturers used asbestos as insulation around the heating element. Conair, General Electric, Gillette, Norelco, Sears, and Sunbeam, every major brand packed those fibers inside the barrel of the dryer. Every time you switched it on, forced air pushed them toward your nose and mouth. A photographer discovered the problem by accident while drying film negatives, when tiny white flecks appeared on the surface, and lab testing confirmed asbestos. The National Institute for Occupational Safety and Health measured fiber concentrations that exceeded permissible exposure limits from a single household blow dryer. In 1979, the Consumer Product Safety Commission issued a voluntary recall covering 18 million units. Only 3 million were ever returned. The other 15 million stayed in bathroom cabinets, blowing asbestos into American homes well into the mid-80s. Hairdressers who used these dryers 8 to 14 hours a day later developed mesothelioma, with a latency period averaging 28 years. They came in a colorful box from Regent Sports or Hasbro, packaged like any backyard game, except each dart was 12 inches long, weighted with metal, and tipped with a steel point designed to stick in the ground on impact. Lawn darts, sold under the brand name Jarts, were a fixture at 80s barbecues and neighborhood cookouts. You threw them underhand toward a plastic ring target 35 feet away, and when you missed, the dart came down wherever gravity decided, on the patio, the driveway, or whoever happened to be standing nearby. Between 1970 and 1988, the Consumer Product Safety Commission documented over 6,000 injuries tied to lawn darts. The FDA had proposed a ban as early as 1970, but manufacturers negotiated a compromise that kept them on shelves with an adults-only label. In 1987, 7-year-old Michelle Snow was struck in the head by a dart in Riverside, California, and did not survive. Her father David spent the next year fighting for a total ban. The CPSC finally pulled lawn darts from stores in 1988, the week before Christmas. If you grew up in the 80s, you spent years staring at a popcorn ceiling, that bumpy textured coating sprayed across millions of homes from the 50s through the early 80s. It hid drywall imperfections and dampened sound between floors. What the marketing left out was the ingredient list. Until the EPA banned spray-on asbestos in 1978, the mixture contained chrysotile asbestos, sometimes 10% of the total coating. The danger stayed dormant as long as nobody touched it. The moment you scraped, sanded, or drilled into it, microscopic fibers went airborne. Homeowners who tried do-it-yourself removal breathed in the same material that caused fatal lung disease in industrial workers. Professional removal runs $2 to $5 per square foot. Millions of these ceilings remain in place, and every renovation that disturbs one without testing is a roll of the dice. If popcorn ceilings hid danger above your head, the walls had their own problem. During the energy crisis of the 1970s, hundreds of thousands of homeowners pumped urea formaldehyde foam insulation into their wall cavities through small, drilled holes. The foam was mixed on site and injected between the studs, where it expanded and hardened. The problem was formaldehyde, a known carcinogen, off-gassing into the living space for months. The Consumer Product Safety Commission received over 2,200 complaints from more than 5,700 people reporting respiratory problems, headaches, and nausea. In 1982, the agency banned UFFI by a 4-to-1 vote. 1 year later, the Fifth Circuit Court of Appeals overturned the ban. In Canada, the government had subsidized installation in 80,000 homes, then spent millions ripping it out. American removal costs could hit $50,000 per house. Portable kerosene heaters surged in the early 1980s after energy prices spiked. They were cheap and portable, with no electric bill and no chimney, no vent, no connection to outside air. Every drop of fuel burned inside the unit released its combustion products straight into your living room, including carbon monoxide, nitrogen dioxide, sulfur dioxide, and fine particulate matter that settled on furniture and lungs alike. The CPSC estimated roughly 90 deaths and 2,300 residential fires per year from kerosene heaters during the decade. Carbon monoxide is colorless and odorless. In a sealed bedroom on a cold night, it could replace the oxygen so gradually you never woke up. Manufacturers printed a recommendation to crack a window, but in the dead of a Midwestern January, with the wind chill below zero, few families complied. Most states eventually banned unvented kerosene models for indoor residential use, but the heaters themselves were never recalled, and millions sat in garages and basements for years afterward. The round Honeywell thermostat on the hallway wall of nearly every American home built before the late 80s contained a glass vial of liquid mercury, 3 to 12 grams depending on the model. When the temperature shifted, the vial tilted, the mercury rolled, and the electrical contact opened or closed. The danger was not in normal use. It was in what happened when the thermostat broke or got tossed in the trash. Shattered glass released silvery beads that rolled into carpet fibers, cracks, and heating vents. Kids found them mesmerizing. They rolled them between their fingers, cupped them in their palms, brought them to school in jars. The mercury vaporized at room temperature, releasing invisible fumes that built up in enclosed spaces. Honeywell launched a recycling program, but by then millions of units had already been cracked open or dumped in landfills. Long before tanning salons lined every strip mall in America, General Electric and Westinghouse sold home sunlamps, ultraviolet bulbs mounted in a reflector dish that you aimed at your face and body from a few feet away. In the early 1980s, at-home tanning boomed, and these lamps flew off store shelves with almost no safety regulation attached. There were no automatic timers, no UV filtering shields, no dosage guidance beyond a vague pamphlet suggesting you start with a few minutes and work your way up. The bulbs blasted unfiltered UVA and UVB at intensities that could produce a severe burn in under 10 minutes. People fell asleep beneath them. People used them daily for months, chasing a year-round tan. The FDA did not begin regulating sunlamp products until 1985, and even then the rules were modest. By the time dermatologists confirmed the direct link between UV exposure and melanoma, a generation had already logged thousands of hours of unprotected radiation in their own bedrooms. The heat pad on your ironing board, the one your mother swapped out every couple of years when it scorched and cracked, contained up to 40% asbestos. It was there because asbestos resisted heat so well, making it the obvious choice for a surface pressed by a hot iron several times a week. Regular use wore the cover down, producing cracks, chips, and frayed edges. Each time the iron landed, heat and pressure loosened fibers from the deteriorating pad, releasing them into whatever room the board stood in, usually a bedroom or a cramped laundry space with no ventilation. Unlike asbestos in ceiling tiles, this exposure happened at close range, directly under your face, for 20 or 30 minutes at a stretch. No recall was ever issued. No manufacturer notified customers. The product simply vanished from shelves as newer materials took over. Every bathroom counter held a can of Aquanet, and every kitchen cabinet held a can of Lysol. The propellant inside both was chlorofluorocarbon, CFC, a chemical that drifted into the stratosphere and systematically shredded the ozone layer. Americans sprayed an estimated 2 to 3 billion aerosol cans per year in the 80s. Those CFC molecules rose intact into the upper atmosphere, where ultraviolet radiation split them apart and released chlorine atoms that each destroyed thousands of ozone molecules. By 1985, scientists confirmed a massive ozone hole over Antarctica. The Montreal Protocol of 1987 began the global phase-out. Aquanet reformulated. Lysol switched propellants, but the damage already done would take decades to reverse. The ozone layer is not expected to fully recover until roughly 2065, nearly a century after the last CFC can was emptied into a suburban bathroom. In the 1980s, the water running through your kitchen faucet passed through copper pipes joined with lead-based solder, a practice so routine it was standard plumbing. That solder contained up to 50% lead, and it leached into the water every time the tap ran, especially on the first draw of the morning after water had sat in the pipes overnight. Hot water pulled even more lead into the glass. Families made coffee, mixed baby formula, and filled glasses with water, carrying measurable concentrations of a neurotoxin that causes developmental damage in children at any exposure level. The Safe Drinking Water Act amendments of 1986 banned lead solder in new plumbing. But the ban applied only to new work. Every joint soldered before that date stayed in the walls. The pipes were not recalled. The water was not tested. Many of those same joints are still carrying drinking water today. The furniture boom of the 80s ran on particle board, cheap panels made by pressing wood chips together with urea formaldehyde glue. Bookshelves, entertainment centers, dressers, and kitchen cabinets filled homes with products that continuously released formaldehyde gas. The off-gassing was worst when the furniture was new, but it continued for years in warm, humid rooms. Formaldehyde is classified as a known human carcinogen by the International Agency for Research on Cancer. At lower levels, it triggers eye irritation, headaches, and breathing problems, symptoms millions of people wrote off as allergies. The sharp chemical smell from a freshly unboxed bookshelf was a measurable dose of carcinogenic gas. No federal labeling existed in the 80s. California did not set emission standards for composite wood until 2007. Federal rules followed in 2010, 3 decades after the furniture was already in the house. The decorative fireplace set that made your living room cozy on a winter evening, with fake ceramic logs arranged over a gas burner and surrounded by heat-resistant cement, was built with asbestos. The CPSC banned asbestos embers and patching compounds in 1977 under the Consumer Product Safety Act, but products already manufactured and sitting on store shelves kept selling into the early 1980s. The cement holding the surround together contained chrysotile asbestos as a binding agent, and the decorative logs used asbestos fibers to mimic the look of ash and glowing embers. Heat cracked and degraded these materials over time, releasing fibers into the warm updraft each time you lit the fire. Families gathered around it on holidays, sat inches away on the hearth, and breathed air carrying invisible carcinogenic particles stirred up by the flames they were enjoying. In 1984, millions of American homes built before the mid-60s still ran on two-prong ungrounded outlets, the kind where the third hole did not exist. The National Electrical Code had required grounded receptacles in new construction since 1971, but that covered only new work. Everyone else plugged three-prong appliances into two-prong outlets using cheap plastic adapters that defeated the entire purpose of the ground connection. Without a ground wire, a short circuit inside a toaster or washing machine sent current through the metal housing and into whoever touched it. There was no path for the fault to trip the breaker. It flowed through the person instead. Ground fault interrupters did not become mandatory in bathrooms and kitchens until well into the 80s. The cheapest homes in the poorest neighborhoods were the last to be upgraded. If the wiring behind the wall was outdated, the appliances plugged into it made things worse. Portable electric space heaters sold through the early 1980s came with a heating coil, a reflector, and a cord. Nothing else. No tip-over shutoff. No overheat sensor. No timer. You plugged it in, turned the dial, and hoped nothing fell against it while you slept. The CPSC reported that space heaters of all types were associated with roughly 25,000 residential fires and 300 deaths per year during the decade. The radiant models with exposed orange coils could ignite curtains, bedding, or clothing draped across them in seconds, and families routinely used them to dry laundry in the winter. Underwriters' laboratories eventually updated Standard 1278 to require tip-over protection. But the rollout was slow, and older units without the feature stayed in closets and garages for years. A heater that tipped face down onto carpet could start a fire in under 4 minutes. The attic insulation in an estimated 35 million American homes looked like tiny gold and brown pebbles. Lightweight, shimmering, it was poured between the joists like gravel. It was vermiculite, and most of it came from a single mine near Libby, Montana, operated by the W.R. Grace Company under the brand name Zonalite. That mine sat on a deposit contaminated with tremolite asbestos. Every bag shipped to hardware stores carried asbestos mixed in with the vermiculite. Homeowners poured it into attics with bare hands and breathed the dust without a thought. The EPA declared Libby a Superfund site after hundreds of residents developed asbestos-related diseases. More than 400 people in the area have died from exposure linked to the mine. The insulation remains in millions of attics undisturbed and waiting for the next renovation to stir it up. The photography boom of the 1980s sent thousands of hobbyists into bathrooms and basement closets to build home darkrooms, the red safe light, the chemical trays, the clothesline of drying prints. It felt like magic. The chemistry was not. Developer solutions contained hydroquinone, stop baths used acetic acid. Fixtures relied on sodium thiosulfate, and toners brought in selenium and chromium compounds. Most home setups had no ventilation beyond a cracked door. Fumes built up in a space the size of a bathroom, while hobbyists spent hours with their hands in open trays. Spent chemicals went straight down the drain, including silver and other heavy metals. No hobby manual from the era warned you to treat the process like what it was, amateur industrial chemistry in an unventilated room. The brass faucets, doorknobs, and towel racks that defined the 80s bathroom decor contained up to 8% lead by weight. Manufacturers added lead to the copper-zinc alloy because it made the metal easier to machine, and it gave the finish a smoother appearance. That lead content was not listed on packaging or disclosed at the point of sale. For faucets and supply valves, the lead sat in direct contact with drinking water flowing through the kitchen every day. Warm water dissolved more lead than cold, and the first draw of the morning carried the highest concentration. The federal definition of lead-free fixtures was not updated until the Reduction of Lead in Drinking Water Act of 2011, which took effect in 2014. For more than 30 years, brass, marketed as a premium bathroom upgrade, was leaching a neurotoxin into the water supply. Clap on, clap off. The jingle was inescapable after Joseph P. launched the clapper in 1985, and within a few years, over 7 million units had been sold. You plugged a lamp into the clapper, plugged the clapper into the wall, and toggled power with a double hand clap. The convenience was genuine. The engineering was not. Early units had no Underwriters Laboratories listing, the baseline safety certification for anything plugged into a wall. Users connected space heaters, window fans, and high-draw appliances that pushed the device past its rated capacity. Overloaded circuits generated heat at the connection point. The plastic housing offered no thermal protection. Consumer complaints described units that grew hot, melted at the prongs, or sparked. The product was never recalled, and the original 80s version earned its place in the catalog of things that should not have been plugged into a bedroom wall. Between 1965 and 1973, roughly 2 million homes were wired with aluminum instead of copper, a cost-cutting move during a period of spiking copper prices. The wiring looked the same behind the outlet plate, but behaved differently under load. Aluminum expands and contracts more than copper when heated, and over years of cycling the connections loosened at every junction, such as switches, outlets, and breaker panels. Loose connections generate heat. Heat causes more expansion. The cycle accelerated until the contact point reached ignition temperature. The CPSC warned in 1977 that aluminum-wired homes were 55 times more likely to reach fire hazard conditions at the outlets. By the 80s, electricians were finding scorched outlet boxes and melted insulation in homes less than 15 years old. Full rewiring cost thousands. Most owners settled for cheaper junction fixes that left aluminum running through every wall. The automatic garage door opener bolted to the ceiling of nearly every suburban garage in the 80s had one job: close the door when you hit the button. It did not stop if something was in the way. Before 1993, residential openers were not required to include auto reverse sensors. The door descended with the full force of the motor and the weight of the panel, and if a child or pet was underneath, it kept going. The U.S. Consumer Product Safety Commission documented 54 deaths between 1982 and 1992, the majority involving children who crawled under a closing door or who hit the button while playing. It took a decade of deaths for Underwriters Laboratories to update its safety standard, number 325, mandating entrapment protection after January 1993. Older units were not subject to the new rule, and some are still running in homes that never replaced the original opener. Electric blankets sold through the 80s had resistive heating wires woven into the fabric, controlled by a dial with low, medium, and high settings, and no automatic shutoff. You turned one on before bed, and it ran until you turned it off. If you forgot, it ran all day. The wires aged with every wash cycle, every fold, every season bunched in storage. Cracks in the insulation created hot spots. Pinched wires arced against each other. The CPSC attributed an estimated 5,000 house fires per year to electric blankets during the decade. Electromagnetic field concerns added worry in the late 80s after studies suggested prolonged close-range exposure to the low-frequency fields might carry health risks. Modern blankets include shutoff timers and overheat sensors, but older models spent decades in linen closets, pulled out every winter, and left running through the night. The 9 by 9-inch vinyl floor tiles found in kitchens, basements, and bathrooms across America were one of the most common asbestos containing products in the home, and the 9 by 9 size is still used by inspectors as a reliable indicator that asbestos is present. The tiles themselves were reinforced with asbestos fibers for durability, and the black mastic adhesive holding them to the subfloor contained even more. As long as the tile stayed intact and undisturbed, the risk was low, but the moment a homeowner pried up a cracked tile, scraped old adhesive, or sanded the floor for a renovation, asbestos fibers went airborne in a closed room. Millions of these tiles were installed in homes built from the 1950s through the early 80s. No recall was ever issued. The recommended approach today is capsulation, covering them with new flooring rather than removing them. But countless homeowners rip them out by hand during renovations, with no testing, no containment, and no idea what they were breathing. If you spilled wine on the carpet in the 1980s, you reached for a spot cleaner, and there was a decent chance the active ingredient was carbon tetrachloride, a chlorinated solvent that dissolves stains on contact. It worked beautifully. It also destroyed your liver and kidneys with repeated exposure. Carbon tetrachloride had been used in household cleaning products for decades, and even after the EPA classified it as a probable human carcinogen and restricted its commercial use, bottles lingered under kitchen sinks and in laundry rooms for years. The solvent evaporated quickly, filling a poorly ventilated room with fumes that the body absorbed through the lungs and skin. Chronic exposure caused fatty liver degeneration and kidney failure. The sweet chemical smell was distinctive, and people associated it with cleanliness, not organ damage. It was eventually phased out of consumer products, but no mandatory recall pulled existing bottles from homes. The same carelessness that left toxic solvents under the sink also filled kitchen cabinets with indoor insecticide foggers, the aerosol cans you set off and left behind while the house filled with a chemical cloud. In the 80s, over-the-counter bug bombs contained organophosphates and pyrethroids, and some used chlordane, a pesticide so persistent the EPA banned it for indoor use in 1988. You set the can on a table, pressed the tab, walked out, and waited. The fog reached every surface: countertops, dishes, bedding, toys on the floor. Families returned too soon before the chemicals had settled and breathed concentrated pesticide mist. CPSC documented cases of fogger cans igniting when the propellant hit a gas pilot light, blowing out windows and starting house fires. Residue coated every surface your skin touched for days afterward. The green-tinted lumber used to build backyard decks and playground sets in the 1980s was pressure-treated with chromated copper arsenate, CCA, a chemical cocktail that included arsenic, one of the most well-documented poisons in human history. The arsenic leached from the wood surface over time, especially in rain and humidity, leaving a residue on every board your bare feet, your hands, and your children touched. A study published by the Environmental Working Group estimated that a child playing on a CCA-treated playset could absorb arsenic at levels exceeding Environmental Protection Agency safety thresholds from skin contact alone. The wood industry resisted regulation for years, arguing the arsenic was locked inside the lumber. The Environmental Protection Agency did not phase out CCA for residential use until 2004, more than 2 decades after the first health concerns were raised. Decks and playsets built with the original lumber are still standing in backyards across the country. In the late 1980s, the Consumer Product Safety Commission recorded more than 20,000 emergency room visits per year, involving baby walkers, wheeled frames that let infants scoot across the floor before they could walk. The primary danger was stairs. A baby in a walker could reach the top of a staircase in seconds, and momentum often carried the child over the edge before a parent could react. Those falls produced head injuries and broken bones, documented in pediatric emergency rooms nationwide. Canada banned the sale and import of baby walkers entirely in 2004. The United States never banned them. The Consumer Product Safety Commission worked with manufacturers on voluntary standards such as friction pads and wider bases, but the core design flaw was never addressed: a wheeled frame that lets a pre-walking infant move faster than an adult can react. The massive console television sitting in an 80s living room contained between 4 and 8 pounds of lead embedded in the glass of the cathode ray tube. The lead was there to shield viewers from the low-level radiation the tube produced during normal operation. As a functioning appliance, the lid stayed sealed inside. The danger arrived when the set was discarded. These CRT televisions became one of the most toxic items in the American waste stream. The lead leached from broken glass in landfills, contaminating soil and groundwater. The sets were also top-heavy. Placed on dressers, shelves, and entertainment centers, they tipped forward when a toddler pulled on the screen or climbed the furniture. The Consumer Product Safety Commission reported that falling televisions caused an average of 1 child death every 3 weeks during peak CRT years. No anchoring hardware was included in the box. No warning label addressed the tip-over risk. The television simply sat on the furniture, heavy and unbalanced, until someone pushed it. The smoke detector screwed to your bedroom ceiling in the 80s contained a tiny pellet of americium-241, a radioactive isotope that ionized the air inside the detection chamber. When smoke particles entered, they disrupted the ion flow and triggered the alarm. The radioactive material was sealed inside a metal housing, and under normal conditions, the exposure risk was negligible. Performance was the real problem. Studies conducted by the National Institute of Standards and Technology showed that ionization detectors were significantly slower to respond to smoldering fires, the kind that fill a house with lethal smoke while the occupants sleep, compared to photoelectric models. Smoldering fires account for a large share of residential fire deaths. Ionization detectors responded quickly to flaming fires, but they could take minutes longer to sound during the slow burn scenarios most likely to kill. For decades, the cheaper ionization models dominated the market, and most households never knew there was a difference. The chest-style freezer in the garage or basement had a latch that locked from the outside and no release mechanism on the inside. If the lid closed on a child who had climbed in, exploring, playing hide-and-seek, or reaching for a popsicle, there was no way out. The airtight seal meant the oxygen inside was consumed in minutes. The Refrigerator Safety Act of 1956 required that refrigerator doors be openable from the inside, but the language was written for upright units with magnetic latches. Chest freezers with mechanical latches persisted for decades, and second-hand units with the original hardware circulated through garage sales and classified ads well into the 80s and beyond. The Consumer Product Safety Commission, or CPSC, documented dozens of child suffocation deaths linked to abandoned or improperly stored chest freezers and refrigerators over the decades. The fix was simple. Remove the latch or the lid entirely before disposal. But the warnings never reached every household, and the units kept showing up in garages, basements, and porches where kids played unsupervised. Every one of these sat in a home where someone trusted it. If this hit close to home, please leave a like and subscribe.